WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. How to remediate accessibility issues in WordPress with speaker Cam Coulter, Digital Access Specialist at Santa Clara University. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Hi, everyone. We're back. How's it going? It's awesome that you are all here, and we are going to get started with our next session. So welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. And my name is Laura, and I'm your MC for this talk. Thank you for joining us for how to remediate accessibility issues in WordPress with Cam Coulter. Cam Coulter is a writer and accessibility nerd, among other things, who thinks incessantly about ethical technology, speculative fiction, and intentional community. They are certified professional in web accessibility and work at Santa Clara University as a digital access specialist. They have previously worked as an accessibility consultant at Level Access and as a training specialist at Hope Services, a large nonprofit organization in the San Francisco Bay Area serving persons with developmental disabilities and mental health needs. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees. Please welcome Cam.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Laura said, I am Cam Coulter. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a certified professional in web accessibility through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. I currently work at Santa Clara University as a digital access specialist, and this is actually a new role for me. Until recently, I was working at Level Access as an accessibility consultant. And in that role, I tested a ton of websites for conformance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and I would identify and report accessibility issues, and then work with our clients to fix or remediate those issues. Remediating is sort of just a fancy way of saying fixing things, so they're, for the most part, interchangeable. And that's what we're talking about today. So when I would work with clients to help them to report and help them fix issues in my last role, I usually did that at the level of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because one, that's ultimately where the issues need to be fixed in order for the impact to be appreciated by people with disabilities. And two, I often didn't know how exactly a website was coded on the back end, what framework or content management systems they were using. And HTML level recommendations are general enough that they'll work for everyone, more or less. However, if you use WordPress, code level recommendations may not be that useful to you, right? In WordPress, your website is generated by combining together a lot of different pieces. And fixing accessibility issues in WordPress may not be as simple as edit this one line of code here. I mean, that's a reason a lot of us like to use WordPress, right? It has a graphical user interface, and you can easily make a website without needing to write every line of code. But that does leave open the question, how do you fix or remediate accessibility issues in WordPress? So that's what we're going to talk about for this hour. I'm going to share my screen here. Cool, and I believe you should be able to see my screen now. So that's our topic today, how to fix or remediate accessibility issues in WordPress. So this talk is for you if you are a WordPress site owner who knows a little bit about digital accessibility and you're looking to fix accessibility issues on your site that you've identified, or maybe that were identified by a third party in a recent audit. This site is also for accessibility testers and consultants who might be those third parties auditing or testing other websites, and who specifically want to be able to give WordPress-specific recommendations when they flag issues. This talk is also for designers, developers, and content creators who are working in WordPress, who may have identified issues on the sites that they're working on and need to fix those issues. I should note that this is, I would think of as an intermediate level talk. You do not need to be an expert. We are not going to dive into too many technical details, but I will assume that you have a basic understanding of WordPress and a general understanding of digital accessibility, and that you know about some common types of accessibility issues. We won't have time to explain those in as much detail as if we would in another context. So that's where we're coming from. Learning goals. By the end of this hour together, it is my goal that you will be able to identify the likely source of an accessibility issue on a WordPress site. I hope that you will be able to remediate page level accessibility issues, such as implicit headings, insufficient color contrast, and images with improper alt text. And I hope that you will be able to determine how to approach remediating plugin level or theme level issues. Those ones can be more complicated. So by the end of our talk today, you might not feel totally like you know how to do it exactly, but you should have a sense of, all right, this is how I can go about it. This is how I would get started. This is how I could approach it. So the main parts of a WordPress site, I would say, are WordPress core, your theme and any customizations that you've installed to it, any plugins that you've installed, your pages and your posts, and your media library. The media library typically is a collection of photos on your WordPress site, but it can include other things as well, such as documents or videos. Now, to fix an accessibility issue in WordPress, you need to start by identifying where exactly the issue comes from. Is it specific to your theme? Is it a problem with your theme and how you've set it up? Or is it maybe specific to a plugin you're using? Or is it just a page level issue, for example? So we're going to go through these categories one by one. We're going to focus on pages and then plugins and then themes. And we'll talk about what types of issues you can expect to find at each level and how to go about fixing them. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on classic themes instead of block themes. But some of what we talk about will apply to those ones as well. And I should note that it won't always be perfectly clear at first where exactly an issue comes from on a WordPress site, but we can make informed guesses. And if you're an admin, you can log into that admin dashboard, the back end, and poke around to figure out where exactly an issue comes from and how to fix it. Here, I'll also note that if you're a third-party consultant who's testing a site or even just testing your own site, when you report accessibility issues on a WordPress site, I'd recommend that you include a likely source field so that for each accessibility issue you flag, I think it can be helpful to know where you think the issue is coming from. For example, is it something you see repeated across multiple pages? In that case, it might be a theme level issue. But if the issue looks like it's specific just to this one blog post, it might be a post or a page level issue. If you want to go above and beyond, you could maybe even get a list of the plugins that are used on a site and then take a guess as to which plugin might be causing the issue if you think it's a plugin level issue. For example, if there's a plugin that is installed for tabs or accordions and you notice there's an issue with tabs or accordions, it might be specific to that plugin. Now, if you're a site owner and you have your issues, accessibility issues sorted by type in this way, it might be able to help you speed things along when you're trying to fix them. For example, you can take all of your issues that look like they're related to your theme and then send it to your theme developer to work on fixing them. But if you have a lot of issues that are really page level issues, you can probably have your content creators fix most of those because those are things that content creators should be able to fix and should know about when they're creating additional content for your site. So with all that, let's really dive into it and talk about page level accessibility issues you might find on a WordPress site. Page level issues may include implicit or unnecessary headings. And that means you have a heading that is logically a heading, but it isn't programmatically marked as such. Or maybe the opposite, you have something that is not logically a heading, but you've actually tagged it as a heading. Related, another page level issue might be implicit list, which is you have a list, but it isn't programmatically marked as a list. And these issues are important for screen reader users mostly because they can navigate your page by jumping to headings or jumping to list items. And also, if you don't have it a heading tagged as a heading, it might be confusing to a user who doesn't realize that it's a heading for a section. Other page level issues could include insufficient color contrast, but just for particular blocks of text. Sometimes color contrast issues are theme level issues if you see it across multiple pages on your site, or if you see it, for example, in your footer, that's probably more of a theme level issue. But if it's just a particular block of text on one particular page, that's probably a page level issue. And another page level issue could be images on that page that are missing alternative text or that have inappropriate alt text. So I'm going to switch over from my PowerPoint here to an actual WordPress site, and we're going to look at some specific page level issues. And I'm going to scroll down this page, and I want you to think about what are some types of issues that either you spot or that you think, hey, I think that might be a page level issue. That's something I'd want to investigate more. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds for that. All right, so I'm going to briefly go over the page level issues on this page. First up, you may have noticed we have some text here that has very low color contrast. It's a light gray text against a white background. You might not have even noticed it because it's quite hard to see. I'm going to highlight it here in case that helps. It says, these black beans are so delicious and easy to make. You're going to love them. This is a page titled Instant Pot Black Beans. It's a recipe. So that's one page level issue. This text has very bad color contrast. Right below that, we have an image of black beans. And I'm going to go ahead and inspect this element. And you can see that over here in the accessibility pane within DevTools, it says image has empty alt text, which is not something you would want. This is a page for a recipe, so you probably want to be able to know what the food actually looks like. And so in this case, I think we want to make sure that image has alt text. So that's another page level issue here. And then just below that, we have the heading ingredients, which precedes a list of ingredients. And when I inspect this, you'll see that this is just a paragraph element with a strong element nested inside of it. It is not programmatically or logically a heading. So that's an issue as well. Again, for screen reader users, they won't know that it's a heading, and it'll be harder for them to navigate the page. So how do we go about fixing these? Let me check my notes. Cool, yeah. So to fix a page level issue, you can come to the WordPress backend, the admin dashboard, and then you're going to want to navigate to that page. So in this case, I'm going to go to Pages, All Pages, and then I'll select the page title. And that'll take me to the WordPress block editor for this page. And the way you fix most page level issues is through the WordPress block editor. So for example, I'm going to navigate to this block of text that has very low color contrast. And then over here on the right side of my screen, you'll see that there's a pane for the current block that's selected, a little tab control there. And right below that, it says it's a paragraph. And then there's a section for color, for the text color of this block. You'll actually see WordPress will usually warn you if text has insufficient color contrast, which is great. So here it says, this color combination may be hard for people to read. Try using a brighter background color and or a darker text color. So that's one notice that this actually is a problem, which is great. So to change this, I'll just select the text color here, and then I can, sorry, one sec. And then I can choose a new color. In this case, I can just click on black to change that text color to black. And that'll do it. So now you can see this text has much better color contrast. So that's one way you can fix color contrast issues on the page level. Next up, I'm going to skip down to the heading next. And I'll click on this heading for ingredients. And you'll see if you look again under the block pane, under the block tab here, it says this is just a paragraph, but this actually should be set as not a paragraph block, but a heading block. So to change that, I'm going to navigate to the toolbar for this block. And over here on the left, start of this toolbar, there's a button titled Paragraph. When I click on that, it'll open this little pop-up, and I have options to transform this to another type of block. In this case, I will select Heading. That is not quite working. I think I need to just try one more time. Okay, there we go. So I've set that as a heading now. And now you can see again under block on the right sidebar, it actually identifies that as a heading block. If you want to make sure your headings are appropriate levels. So again, in the toolbar for WordPress, there's a control for change level. It has this icon H2. If you select that, you can change it to a heading 1, heading 2, or heading 3. In this case, a heading 2 makes sense, so we'll leave it at that. And that's how you could fix a heading level issue in the WordPress block editor for a specific page. Next up, let's look at this photo here. When I select this photo, again, in the block toolbar here, under settings, there's a field for alternative text. And you can see that that's blank, which is not what we want. So we want to make sure that this image has good, informative alternative text. In this case, before we do that, I'm going to back out of the block editor for a moment. I'm going to click Save just for now. And in the WordPress backend, the dashboard here, I'm going to navigate to Media, which is where you can find photos on your site. I'm going to select this photo that I had uploaded of black beans. And you can see there's a field here for alternative text and also a field for description. And here I added a small bowl of cooked black beans beside a lime. And that should actually be set as the alternative text in this case. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into alternative text. And so now the next time I use this photo, when I upload it again on another page, it'll have that as the default text, which is awesome. So let's go back to the page we were looking at and see how that affects it. So when I navigate back to this image, even though we just added alt text to it, you'll see that it still doesn't have any alt text. And that's actually, in some ways, I would call it a feature because good alternative text is contextual. The same image in different contexts, you'll want to use different alt text for it. And so that's what WordPress is assuming here. If I were to add the image again, my understanding is I think it would use the default alt text. But since I already have it on the page, it thinks I don't want any alt text here. So in this case, I can just paste the alt text that I had earlier into here. But if I wanted to change it to be more specific to this page, I could. One reason you might want to do this, for example, is if you have an image of a dog at a park, right? And if the topic of the page is just talking about dogs in general, for a bunch of people who own dogs, you might want to have general alt text that says a golden retriever chases a ball. But if it's for your personal blog where you share about your life, in that case, you might want to describe the dog by their name and say, Coda chases a ball at a park. So that's one reason you might want to have alt text for different cases. So in this case, we added the alt text here. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then we'll navigate back to this page. And I will refresh it. And now you can see this text has much better color contrast. This heading, if we inspect it, it is programmatically marked as a heading level 2, which is great. And if I inspect the image as well, you'll see that it now has alt text for it. So that would be an example of how you can remediate some page level accessibility issues on WordPress. Ultimately, page level issues are things that you can, for the most part, fix once you view the page here in the WordPress block editor. You want to make sure you're using the proper block type, if it's a list or a heading or a paragraph. And you want to make sure you have sufficient color contrast. And yeah, that mostly covers it. So we're going to have to move on from there. I'll jump back to our presentation. And next we are going to talk about plugin level issues. So plugin level issues are the most, I would say, maybe complicated to remediate, or at least the most complicated to figure out, because plugins do so many different things in WordPress. If a plugin adds a component to your site, and if there's an accessibility issue with that component specifically, it's probably a plugin level issue. So for example, if you wanted a tab control on your site or an accordion, and if you add a plugin to do that, and then if there is a accessibility issue with that, it's probably from that plugin. Um, I would recommend that you keep your plugins as limited as possible and used for very specific purposes. Otherwise, it might be harder to identify the exact source of plugin level issues. If you have plugins for a bunch of, if you have multiple plugins for accordions, for example, or if you have plugins that kind of overlap. Um, so try to use as few plugins as possible, have them for very clear purposes, and that'll help you identify, oh, there's an issue with this specific thing on the site. We know that's related to a plugin, so that's probably the source of this issue. So here I'm going to jump back to our test site and show you a plugin level issue. So on this page, I installed a plugin for a tab control component. It's very simple. It's just two tabs called first tab and second tab, and they both have some lorem ipsum filler text in it. And the issue with this tab component is it's missing a visible focus indicator. So I'm going to try to navigate this page using the tab key for a moment. And this is something that sighted users who have mobility challenges might do to navigate a site rather than using a mouse or a touchscreen. They might use a keyboard or other types of assistive technology that mimics a keyboard. And in order to know how to activate a control, they need to see a visible focus indicator. So right now you can see there's this dotted outline around the one comment link. And so that indicates that if I press enter, that'll activate that control right now that has a visible focus indicator. But when I press tab to try to navigate to the next control, there's nothing. There's no visible indicator of what currently has keyboard focus, of what will be activated if I press tab. If I press tab again, still no visible keyboard focus indicator. If I press it again, you'll see this edit control at the bottom now does have a focus outline. So that's what I would call a plugin level issue, because I installed this plugin here for this tab control, and it's missing a focus indicator, very, very clearly related to that. So how do we go about fixing these plugin level issues? First, I would recommend make sure you're using the plugin properly. If possible, you want to change how that plugin or that specific component is configured to fix the issue. Sub plugins are very simple and don't give you a lot of options, but others are very complex. And it might be possible to use the plugin accessibly, but it might not be the default, which is unfortunate, but it is often the case with a lot of plugins that if you configure it in a particular way, it'll be accessible, but the default is not. So first, make sure you've configured it in the best possible way. You've looked over all of the options, and also make sure you've checked out some documentation. Larger plugins will have documentation about how to get it set up and used properly. So make sure you give that a read over. It very well might be possible to fix your plugin level issues just by changing how you have configured your plugin. This is going to vary a lot depending on what the actual issue is and what plugin you're using. Now, if that doesn't work, and if it's a CSS level issue, you can try adding custom CSS in the additional CSS panel within the theme customizer. And I'm going to show you how to do this in just a minute. Actually, we should show you now, and then we'll come back. And so CSS level issues are typically result in low color contrast, or like we were just looking at, lack of a visible keyboard focus indicator is also a CSS level issue. So let's look at how we might fix that one. So here I'm going to inspect this code, this tab control in Chrome DevTools, and I'm going to filter for focus styles. And you'll see that there is this one CSS rule here that says it does actually have an outline, but it's a transparent outline, so you don't see it, which is not great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this CSS rule, and then in the WordPress backend, I'm going to navigate to Appearance, and then Customize. And then on this next page, I'll navigate down to additional CSS in this left sidebar with options. And here I can add additional CSS to the site. So I'm going to paste that CSS rule that I had copied. And I'm going to change that to something new. So we're using the same CSS selector, but instead of saying the outline is transparent, I'm going to say, give me one moment here. Sorry, I'm having some keyboard troubles. There we go. So instead of saying it should have a transparent outline, I'm going to give it a text decoration of underline, and then I will hit publish. And now let's go back and reload that page. And I'm going to try to, again, use the tab key to navigate across this page. Let me make that a little bigger for you. Okay, so I'll press tab, tab, and you can see the one comment control does have a focus outline, and I'll press tab again. And now you can see that first tab control has an underline. So that indicates that that has keyboard focus. If I press tab again, the second tab control has an underline, which means it has keyboard focus. So if I press enter now, that'll change to the other tab. So that's one way that you can fix CSS level issues with the plugin. Find the specific CSS selector, and then write a new style to override it. So what if that doesn't work? What if you have what I would say is a fundamentally inaccessible plugin? Well, in that case, you got to reach out to the plugin developer and file an accessibility bug. It is important that plugin developers know that accessibility issues exist in their code. It's important that they know that users care about that. And it's important that they fix it for all users. So even if you're able to fix it by changing the CSS, you might want to reach out anyway. It's also important to know that a lot of plugin developers may not be full-time people doing this as their job. It might be their side gig, or for some people, it might even be their unpaid hobby. So I would reach out and be very polite and offer to work with them. Understand that for some people, it might take a little bit more time depending on how much support is behind this plugin. I would also recommend that you describe the real world impacts to users so that the plugin developers can understand how it affects people. And if it's important to you, you can also describe how it impacts your site's accessibility compliance. I would also recommend that you try to be as descriptive as possible about both what the current issue is and how it could or should be fixed. Remember that if there's accessibility issues in a plugin, you might know more about accessibility than the plugin developer. So try to share that knowledge with them. Otherwise, if you just say there's this problem, we need it fixed, they might not know how to go about fixing it or what it would look like to fix it. So try to work with them, be polite, be cooperative, read any documentation they have about how to contact them, and work from there. If for whatever reason that's not going to work for you, if they don't get back to you, if they're resistant to changing it, that means you need to essentially find a replacement plugin. Look for one that can fill the same need on your site, but doesn't have accessibility issues built in. Always be careful when you're switching to a new plugin or deciding to use one on your site. I would recommend you always do some accessibility testing to begin with before you become really committed to it. But that's essentially what you have to do. Find a replacement if it's not going to work. Now I know some people might be thinking, I'm really attached to this one plugin we're using. The plugin developer isn't going to work with us to fix it. I can't find a replacement. Is there anything I can do? And so in that case, if you really need to do something or try to fix your plugin, you can try to create a secondary plugin that will extend the original plugin using custom hooks. Now this will only work if the developer of the original plugin created custom hooks in that original plugin for you to essentially hook into and work with. If those custom hooks aren't in that original plugin, you would then need to modify your local version, add custom hooks, and then be able to create that secondary plugin. And if you're doing that, I would recommend then you submit a patch to the original developer and be like, can you please add at least these custom hooks so that people can modify plugins. So you might be wondering, why would I create a secondary plugin instead of just editing the original plugin on my site? And that's because you should generally try to avoid modifying a plugin directly, like the local version of a plugin that you have installed on your site. That's because if you go ahead and update that plugin, your changes will be overridden. You will lose them. So you might think, well, okay, I just won't update it. But if you do not update your plugin, that means you're going to miss out on new features, and you might even miss out on security patches. So that's not really a thing you're going to want to do. So again, if there is an issue with your plugin and you really want to fix it, but the developer won't fix it, you can try to create the secondary plugin that'll hook into it using custom hooks. Sometimes this is referred to as an add-on plugin. But here I'm going to note, this is really quite advanced and really beyond the scope of this presentation. I think we could probably do a whole nother presentation on this. So I look forward to watching that one. This is the part I have the least experience with. And I will say this is pretty complicated stuff. You really want someone who's more of a WordPress developer who knows how to design plugins to be able to do this. If you don't have someone like that on your team, you're going to just have to find a replacement. But if you really need an option, this is something you can look into. At the end of this presentation, I'll have a couple links to WordPress documentation on custom hooks that you can read to get a little bit better sense of how that might work. My overall advice here, though, is don't do this. If it's an accessibility issue with a plugin, it really should be fixed at the core so that it's available, so that it's fixed for everyone, all the different users of the plugin and all the different users of those sites. And also this can be quite complicated. So try not to do this, but if you really need to, it's something you can look into. And this is, again, a slide I'm going to skip over because I just showed you how you can fix some plugin level issues by adding CSS in the additional CSS panel. There we go. So next up, let's talk about theme level issues. So theme level issues on a WordPress site may include default text color that results in insufficient color contrast. And this would be text on multiple pages throughout your site. Another theme level issue could be inline links, which is the links in the middle of a paragraph that use color alone to visually indicate that they are interactive. Typically, if you have links in the middle of a paragraph, you want to make sure that they have underlines so that users can easily see that, hey, that's an interactive control. That is typically set as a style at the theme level. And so if there's an issue with that, that's probably a theme level issue. Other theme level issues can include really anything in your header or your footer, or perhaps even in your sidebars, common components that are repeated throughout your whole site. Those are what probably the archetypical examples of theme level issues, anything in your footer or header. So here, let's look at a theme level issue on the site. Give me one moment to check my notes on this. Yeah, so in this case, I'll just show you on this page. Here we have the heading Hello World for this blog post. And then right underneath it, it shows you the date. It says September 28th, 2024, and then one comment before it gives you a preview of the actual text in the post. But that text with the actual date is very low color contrast. It's, again, light gray text on a white background, so it's hard to see. This is something that's set at the theme level because it's part of a component that's repeated across a lot of pages. If I were to go to this Hello World post on my site and look at it just in the page view, I wouldn't see that September date anywhere because it's part of the metadata of the post. When you see it when your users actually visit the site, again, that comes from the theme. So this is an example of what I would say is a theme level issue. So how could you fix it? First, with theme level issues, you have what I would call the easy way. And you have two options here. The first is to go to the theme customizer and look for relevant options and then adjust those as appropriate if you have any good options. If there are issues in your sidebar or footer in the theme customizer, you can look under widgets and you might be able to edit those using the WordPress block editor. And then again, if there are CSS level issues with your theme, you can again try adding custom CSS in the additional CSS panel. So this is something I'm going to show you how to do now to fix this one issue on our site. So again, I'll go to the homepage. You'll see we have this text that has very low color contrast. In WordPress, I'm going to, in the back end, I'll navigate to Appearance, Customize. And this theme that I've installed, it's called Nuclear. It actually has an option for colors here. And the exact options that you might have are going to vary based on what theme you've installed and what options it gives you. But this theme I'm using actually lets me select a secondary text color. And you can see that this actually is a light gray. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to try to change this to, let's say, black. And as soon as I do that, you can see that this text that we were looking at, September 28th, 2024, is now black. And if I hit publish, that'll make the change there. And I'm going to go ahead and reload the page. And that actually fixed it. So with some theme level issues, you can fix them just by coming to the customizer and exploring the available options here and seeing what you're able to change. For some theme level issues, that'll do the trick, which is awesome. That is, again, what I would call the easy way. And again, that will vary based on your theme and what options it supports users to tweak with in that manner. What about the hard way? Well, again, you can reach out to the theme developer and file an accessibility bug. Again, even if you're able to do it the easy way, you might want to do this anyway so that it can be fixed for all users of that theme across multiple sites. A lot of what I said about working with developers for plugins applies here. Be polite, work with them, be specific about the issue and how it could be fixed. If that doesn't work, it's time again, you got to switch from your theme to a different theme, one that's more accessible. If you go to wordpress.org and look in the theme repository there, there's a tag you should search for. It's called accessibility ready. If you search for all of the themes that are marked as accessibility ready have undergone additional accessibility testing. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they're perfect and flawless, but it means they've passed a much higher bar of accessibility than most themes. So if you're looking for a theme, I would always suggest start with the accessibility ready themes. Those ones are likely to have the least amount of issues with them. Now, some of you, again, may be saying, but I really like my theme and the developer won't fix it and I can't quite fix it the easy way and I don't want to switch to another one. What can I do? Well, in that case, you can create a child theme to override the broken portions of your parent theme. Now, again, why would you create a child theme instead of just edit the local theme that you have installed on your server? Similarly, if you edit that local version directly, and then if you update your theme later, your changes will be overridden and removed, which is not really a thing you want. But with a child theme, if you set one up, and then if you update your theme later, the parent theme, your edits will persist. That's the big perk for using a child theme. Now, child themes are, I would say, relatively easy to set up and start using, but they can get quite complicated if you're making major revisions to the parent theme. So keep that in mind. If you're just making a couple tweaks, it's not too hard. I would say it's more of an intermediate level thing, but if you're really making big changes, then it can be more of an advanced task. Essentially, the way the child theme works is you add a folder to your WordPress server where you store your themes for your child theme. You have to set it up in a particular way, but it's not too complicated. And then any files that you have in your child theme folder will override the equivalent files for the parent theme. The one exception is for your functions.php file, which will be added in addition to that. It'll be loaded immediately before the parents. If you're setting up a child theme, what you can do is you can try to identify the relevant attributes in the source code and then search for those, the source code of the parent theme. Search for those. Through trial and error, you can figure out how to tweak the parent theme to fix any issues you have with it. And then you're off to the races, essentially. If you're doing a child theme, I would highly suggest you set up a local WordPress environment or a staging site where you can test out your changes before pushing them to the production site, because there might be a bit of trial and error and you could accidentally break things in your theme before you figure out the correct changes to make. And then again, when you're updating your theme, there's a chance things could get broken again. And so if it's a bigger update, more of a chance. If it's a small update to the theme, it'll probably be okay. But each time you update the theme, you might need to go back and make some tweaks on your side to your child theme. And that's something you would want to do in a local environment or on a staging site. So how do you actually go about finding that all? Um, so this is something I can go into more detail, but we are at about our 40-minute mark. So I'm going to cut it here. If you have more questions about child themes, I can explain them in more detail. But essentially, one thing which is really useful in some code editors like Visual Studio Code is you can actually search for text within not just one file, but across a whole directory. So in this case, in Visual Studio Code, um, I opened up the folder for the parent theme, and I knew there was an issue with this particular CSS selector, the class small part. And so I searched for that CSS selector, and then it took me right to that style.css and showed me where that was. And by changing that color variable to black, that could also solve this issue. Um, yeah, so that's essentially the way you would create a child theme. Search for very specific CSS selectors or classes and see where those are in the parent theme, and then try to make changes to see if you can get it to work. For reference, I have a couple links here to hooks and custom hooks in the WordPress developer documentation, which is a great place to look if you need to try to edit a plugin. Again, I would recommend avoiding that if you can, but you can dive into that if you want to. And I also have links to the accessibility ready themes you can investigate and the documentation for child themes, which I think is not too complicated and something most intermediate level users should be able to set up if you're making only limited changes. And I also have a couple links here to the theme I used for this presentation, Nuclear, the tab plugin I used, which was called Tabby Responsive Tabs, and the photo of black beans that I used in case you're interested in any of those. Thank you for your time. And now we can pause for questions for the next 10 minutes or so, I believe.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Cam. I appreciate that. And awesome job. Yeah, we have a lot of questions. So, and we had a big chat going on, which is great. And it's always good to learn from each other. Our first question's from Sherry. Is there a place where the known compatibility issues with regard to accessibility are listed?
Um, can you read that one more time?
Is there a place where the known compatibility issues with regard to accessibility are listed?
That's a good question. I don't think there's one place because as we looked at in this presentation, there's a lot of things that go into a WordPress site. So you'd probably want to look at, for example, like your theme might have a bug tracker and it might list accessibility issues with your theme. But that would be probably in a different GitHub repository or code repository than the one where accessibility issues for WordPress core are tracked. And so it's going to depend on where the exact issue comes from ultimately.
And I think too, depending on your level of experience, I know that a bunch of us have done presentations where, you know, like the top 5 things, you know, like those basic things of what to check. The contrast is one, like you pointed out, the font size and the in that kind of thing. So yeah, it depends on your level of experience too, and you just got to learn and build upon that too. All right, our next question. Is the text used an accessible font? How can we tell, are there checks to call out inaccessible fonts?
Yeah, so the in this case, I'm going to have to give a shout out to Equalize Digital. They have a plugin that you can use in a WordPress site. You install the plugin, and it'll actually flag accessibility issues for you sort of through the WordPress interface. That's a good way to sort of quickly see what types of accessibility issues you might have on your site. It might not catch everything, but I think it's a pretty decent way to catch at least some of the major issues.
Okay. The next question is from Jen. Would it be redundant to leave the image description in the description field and then to add it to the alt text field?
That's a good question. I don't think it matters so much. My understanding is that the issue description field, when you go to the media library on your site, is just for like the back end so that you can like have a note about the image description. I don't think it gets presented to users anywhere. So it's a little redundant. And it sort of just depends on how you're managing that on your side. Ultimately, the alternative text field is the one that's most important for accessibility.
And to play on that, the next question from Philippe, and this always comes up too, is when to use that alt text. Our biggest discussion, in my understanding, this is a decorative image, as the blind person doesn't learn anything from the image and doesn't need any information from it. So you were doing the bean image, is
Hmm.
that correct? So yeah, is there an overall guideline? What are your thoughts when you're doing a website?
Yeah, that one could honestly again be its own presentation to dive into, because it depends a lot. But ultimately, it's contextual, and some people are going to have different views. The one I shared, I think, arguably is a bit more of a borderline case. Um, but in this case, as a sighted user who's looking at a recipe page, I'm definitely going to want to see a picture of what the food looks like, and so I think it's reasonable to try to provide that equivalent experience to non-sighted users. In this case, I probably could have done a better job trying to describe what exactly those beans look like. And so I think if we had a better example of alt text in that case, it might be more clear of, oh yeah, this is helpful.
Hmm. And you do have people that have minimal sight too, so they appreciate when they can see parts of an image too.
Hmm.
So it's always, I go on the side of caution, and I at least give something to an image that might be considered decorative, unless it's being talked about in the text too. So then you're kind of double upping on that.
Hmm.
The next question is, can you talk about the header hierarchy on a page?
Yeah. So there are 6 levels of headings 1 through 6. Heading level 1 should be the primary page heading. In WordPress, this is usually set up to be the name of a page or a post. And then any headings under that should be heading level 2. If you have a subheading under one of those, it should be 3, and so on and so forth. It's best to sort of try to go in that order. Headings, start with 1. Any subheadings under that are 2. If you have a subheading, should be a heading level 3, and so on.
All right, thank you. Whoops. Uh, from Roger, thoughts on using dot focus versus dot focus slash visible?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the CSS pseudo selector for focus will show whatever that focus style is anytime the element has focus, which often typically includes when a sighted user clicks on the element for a moment. Focus visible, the CSS pseudo selector focus dash visible, your browser is going to try to guess if you're a keyboard user or a mouse user. And so if you're a mouse user and you click on it, it probably won't show. Um, I tend to prefer just to use the focus pseudo selector, and I like to design beautiful focus states that are satisfying. But you can use focus visible as well. It usually works pretty well. It sort of comes down to your design and the site's vision. I think focus is great because it is going to work for everyone, but I've seen the focus visible one work, and it can be acceptable as well.
All right, the next question, got about 2 more minutes. As awareness of accessibility issues grows, particularly due to the legal requirements as such, um, websites are indeed becoming more equipped with built-in features that facilitate the creation of accessible sites. This trend is especially evident in the government sector, where Civic Plus has established itself as a significant player. What do you think will happen, especially since a lot of websites have to scale back on cool looking sites? Do you think it will merge? So cool design and just basic design will be both by 2026?
That is a huge question. Um, I think um, I hope to see websites that are accessible and beautiful and cool. I've definitely seen sites that are both, and I don't think there's any reason you need to have a very basic site in order to be accessible. I do think I do think there's some design out there that's over the top, and I think we might benefit from a society from just more chill websites. But I don't think there's necessarily any contrast or fight there between design and accessibility.
Yes, definitely. And Equalize Digital, check out their website. They have a cool website that brings in a lot of different colors and stuff like that, but still is accessible. That's one of them. Next question from Heather. Can anyone please share oh, sorry. How to work, anonymous, how to work with maps and coordinates in XML markup and site issues?
Yeah. XML markup and maps is, again, I feel like that could easily be its own hour-long presentation or more. Specifically to WordPress, I think if you're using a map on a WordPress, you're probably using some sort of plugin or you're embedding something from another site. And so in that case, I would just want to do as much testing as possible on whatever it is you're bringing in and make sure that that is accessible. And in that case, you're going to have to work with whatever plugin you're using or whatever other site you're embedding into. I think that's the most I can say on that in this time.
Well, thank you, Cam, and thank you all for attending this session. You can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11YDAY and hashtag WPAD2024. We would also appreciate if you could go to 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. You can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. Stay tuned for Agile Accessibility, Building Inclusivity into the Product Roadmap coming up next with Nasa Kuma. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit the sponsors page to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you after the break.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.